I've had 4 flashes ripped off my camera, like completely shredded, torn off my camera. And then I've had not the actual glass, but the plastic on the lens shattered off. And then over the last 2 years, I've had really bad luck with liquid damage. That could be anything from beer to water to I'm not sure what's being thrown on me right now.
Unidentified liquid substance.
Possibly puke. I don't know.
Welcome to Get the Picture podcast. I'm really excited for the interview today. I have Rob Coons here from the Bay Area in California, who has a new photo exhibition that is looking really cool. And I'm really, really thankful that Rob was willing to come out and talk about that exhibition and about some of the amazing photography he does. So welcome to Get the Picture, Rob.
Well, thank you for having me. This is fantastic. I'm very excited to talk about everything.
Hell yeah. So why don't we just start there then with your exhibition? I saw on Instagram that you did a little video promo for an exhibition that you have coming up, or that at that time it was coming up. Now it's actually started, and it looked super cool. So can you tell us what the exhibition is, where it is, and why people should come see it?
Sure. Well, it's an exhibition at the Haight Street Art Center in San Francisco. And it's going to be up for about another month from where we're at now. And it just had the opening last week. And it was pretty intimidating and exciting for me, as it was my first solo show. So that was a really big deal. And it was incredibly stressful because I've kind of peripherally known one of the main directors at the museum gallery, and they had been wanting to work with me for a while. And then they had a show coming down, and they were like, would you be interested? And I said, yeah. And I thought the timeline, like a typical timeline, would be like a month or two before I had to have the photos up. And we basically had less than 3 weeks to put it all together. So it came together very quickly. And they were so cool and helpful. It's just a really cool highlight of a lot of my photos. And what my favorite part is they were willing and encouraging to blow up some of my photos into enormous sizes. So a couple of my photos, we had one that was 8 feet by 10 feet, and another one that was 7 feet by 9 feet. And, I could go ahead and give you a bunch of other measurements as well, but I won't. And then we had a whole series of photos that were 16 inches by 20 inches. So everything was relatively big in presentation. And as you're familiar, but maybe not the listener, a lot of my photos are really tight crops on very highly energetic moments at punk shows. So it really, those type of large format pictures are cool for any photo, really, but it just really is so cool and intense to see these like larger than life figures doing these insane things at shows. And it's all the bigger ones are all done on vinyl, and they turned out fantastic. So it's a really, really fantastic exhibit. Frankly, it's complemented so well by the other 2 exhibits that are going on at the gallery. Number one is there used to be an old punk club in San Francisco called the I-Beam throughout the 80s into the early 90s. And so it was a small club, 500 cap attendance, but all the crazy bands played there, including a lot of like the foundational new wave bands like New Order and The Cure and all these things. And it's crazy. I have a flyer. It's a flyer exhibit of the I-Beam, and that's right next to my photo exhibit. And it's just cool seeing things like New Order played there for $10 and just stuff like that. And then also in the same gallery right now is an exhibit of the Go-Go's, and it's all material from Gina Shock, the drummer who saved everything. So it's this massive exhibit of ephemera from the Go-Go's, and especially concentrating on their earliest years. So it's really cool stuff, like flyers and T-shirts. And Gina took a lot of Polaroids. So there's all these Polaroids, and they're crazy Polaroids of like Sting in 1981 and Little Richard, like all, because they were so famous so quick, and they got to hang out with all the cool people in the time. So it's kind of neat for me personally to exhibit my more modern photos from punk shows amongst these very old flyers from the I-Beam from the early 80s. And then this kind of weird arc of the Go-Go's who went from late 70s, if you will, all the way to still occasionally play today. So it's kind of neat, this old and new, and then this arc of this rock and roll band, very famous rock and roll band that has just kind of transcended all of those decades. So that was really exciting for me. And I don't think that was intentional by the gallery. But in hindsight, I kind of realized it my opening night. I was like, we're covering the whole gamut of decades here. So that was really cool for me. So, and it was really neat. The opening night was fantastic. We had two local punk bands play, Surprise Privilege and False Flag. And that was also exciting for me because they're young, exciting bands doing really, really radical DIY stuff and very confrontational, and like the places they choose to play, they try to make it. Not all their shows, but a lot of their shows are kind of wild and crazy and always trying to make their presence known and make a statement of like kind of what they're doing and where they're playing.
Is one of those the bands the one that played on the Metro or the BART?
Both of them did actually.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, that was a incredible thing. They took over one of our local transportation trains, uh, and it was flyered and everything. Like 400 to 500 people came out, and of course, not everyone could fit on one car, so some people didn't even get to see it. But yeah, I have video and uh, pictures, and that was probably one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life. That a punk like that punks were like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it successfully. Unfortunately, on the train at some point at one of the stops broke the door. I don't know what happened. There's all kinds of rumors of how that happened, but the train got stuck. But the funny part of it is the bands just kept playing. Now we're just having a show on the train, but we're not moving. And then eventually the cop showed up, and it's really funny because the band really pushes the edge of, like I said, they can be a little confrontational in their show locations and stuff, and playing in really public areas. And it's funny, they're very anti-authority, anti-cop, so on and so forth. When the cops show up, always the bands are smart enough to go. The cops show up and they go, "All right, you got to leave." And instead of being like, "No, screw you, cop," they just go, "Okay," because they've already played their show, and they're just like pack up and walk out. So there's never any confrontation. I think they understand the dynamic of we've already accomplished our mission and made our statement. We don't need to go to jail over it. So I kind of like they're smart enough to really stick a thorn in the side of authority, but then know that also maybe it's time to just kind of walk away and go, "Hey, we've done our thing. We'll catch you at the next illegal show that we put on." But yeah,
Cool.
great, great, great stuff.
So the title of your exhibition is, if I have it right, "The Power of Punk Compels Me." Can you say what that means to you? Why that title
Yeah, it's actually the power of punk compels you.
compels
I don't think
you?
it
Got
compels
it.
me. Yeah, but yeah, the it's funny because it doesn't have anything to do everything to do with punk, but nothing to do with punk. It's a slogan from my favorite all-time favorite horror movie, The Exorcist. The scene where she's possessed and the priest is trying to excise the demon, and he's like, "The power of Christ compels you. The power of Christ compels you." I saw that movie when I was like a little kid, and it really terrified me then. And it's funny now because when I see it on TV as a grown adult, I've watched that movie so many times. I know every in and out. I still get like sweaty, and like it really freaks me out because
Yeah.
all these feelings of seeing it when I was a kid are just, it's so intense. And it was funny. I was just sitting there. I was supposed to write a statement and come up with a title for the show. And that just came out of left field. I was just like, "Power of Christ compels the power of punk compels you." Like, I was like, what a perfect name for my show. And I'm so happy with the name, but I was kind of joking with someone the other day. I was like, because like I said, it's my first solo show. And I'm like, well, if I ever get lucky enough to be invited to do another solo show, I've already set the bar too high for my show title and I can't reuse it. So I'm gonna have to hire a copywriter or
There we
something to
go.
come up with my next show title.
So you talked a little bit about how the exhibition came about. If you could talk maybe a little bit more about how it came about. It sounds like knowing people in relationships is probably important. And was it hard for you to choose what pictures to use? I know that for me, I always get stuck. Like I take a lot of photos and then I just dump a bunch of them on social media, and even picking which ones to put there is hard for me. Like, was it hard for you to choose which photos to use, or what was that process like for you?
Yes and no. That was a really cool thing about this particular exhibit is they I went to meet with them and the walls were blank and I'm kind of looking at everything and I thought, geez, how am I gonna fill these walls? And then we started talking about it when I was on site. And I said, we kind of figured out how many photos. And then I said, so do you want me to send you a bunch of examples and then you'll kind of help me curate through these? Because that's just kind of how I figured these types of things would work. And it was really incredible. Then they were like, no, we trust you. We like your work and we're going to leave it to you to choose whatever you want. So in a weird way, it was a relief and more pressure because it's all on me to come up with the images. And it was such a intense amount of trust because they printed the vinyl through their printer. So they saw the files before they were printed. But I printed everything that was on photo paper through my printer. So they didn't even know what they were getting until I actually delivered the photos to them on site. And that's an immense amount of trust for something that they're going to be putting up on their walls for, 5 weeks. But as far as how I picked them, I kind of sat at my desk in front of my computer and I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? Because I have like, thousands of photos to choose from.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, as you're well aware, I post a lot on social media and I just thought, I'm just going to like thumb through my social media and kind of pick and choose some of my favorites. And honestly, that's all I did is I kind of sat with my own social media and kind of flipped through and I was like, oh, I really like this one. This is pretty cool. Some of I go to photos I really like, but then sometimes there's a lot of moments around maybe that particular photo being taken so it's almost a little more weight in my mind. It's not just like a photo. I'm like, oh, that photo is really cool. But then I go, man, I can remember when that moment happened, kind of thing. So it was a combination when I was choosing those photos of those two things. So in some ways, I kind of wanted to do a little more local stuff, but I ended up doing kind of bands more based just on the two elements I was giving you. Maybe I'll do another show in the future there somewhere else where I can do more of a local highlight. But this particular show, you know, had bands from all over. So yeah, I kind of cheated and just used my own social media to help me choose a photo. But honestly, that's I found that to be the easiest thing. I can't imagine just sitting in front of my computer and trying to pour through files. I don't have really good file order on my computer. So
Oh man, tell me about it. Yeah. I think that's actually a very helpful tip. You've already sort of done that first round of culling to decide what you're going to put on social media, so no need to
yeah,
reinvent the wheel. You can already even just start from there, I guess.
yeah. It's a weird way to curate your own stuff, but like you said, you've already curated it and down to a certain point. So let's take it to the next level.
So this is a show of concert photography, live music photography. You've been going to punk shows since the 1980s, as I
Hmm.
understand from other interviews that I've read that you've done, and from talking to you a little before we started recording. But you didn't start taking pictures at shows until 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So why didn't you take pictures before that, and why did you decide to start then?
Well, I mean, I
Like, think
just
of all the
never
bands you
had
could
the
have
interest.
pictures of.
What was that?
Think of all the bands you could have pictures of.
Oh
Oh
my
my
God.
God.
Yeah. Uh, uh, in a weird way, sometimes I think about like, man, if I was only taking pictures at XYZ shows, but I try not to get too hung up on that. I've never been one to really get hung up on the past or the shows I missed or stuff. I love sharing stories of things that I've seen because I'm sure, much like you, we've probably seen some pretty insane things at punk shows, and as we probably both still continue to do that. But uh, I just never was really interested in photography from a standpoint of taking photos. But it's important to note that punk photos have been absolutely instrumental, and especially throughout when I first got into punk in the mid '80s, seeing zines on Maximum, and then the most foundational document to me, even though I didn't photograph till decades later, was If Life's a Bowl of Cherries, What Am I Doing in the Pit, which was the iconic Murray Bowles zine that came out through Maximum Rock and Roll. So I got that when it came out back in the '80s. And Murray was such an incredible photographer, and he caught the action, and just seeing it was like it brought life to these, because I grew up in the Midwest, so I wasn't really seeing a lot of live shows and stuff. So it brought a lot of so much life and depth and energy to the music I was already listening to. So it was very powerful for me. So from that point on, photos were just, I was like a sponge, just kind of like soaking in all these incredible photos and that I would see in the zines and stuff. And really at the time, there weren't, it was just zines. There weren't all these beautiful books out. There is now,
Yeah.
kind of like, kind of like culling and pulling together all these incredible photos that all these iconic photographers have taken over the years. So, with that said, I never actually thought of taking my own a camera to a show. And then I had occasional point and shoots and stuff over the years, but I never took them to shows. I never even crossed my mind. And then in 2016, I bought a really nice DSLR. I thought to myself when I bought it, I'm really into hiking, nature, stuff like that. I was like, oh, I'll go out and photograph. Maybe I'll see a bobcat or a coyote and I'll get a cool picture of it. Never even thought, oh, I'll take this to a punk show. So out of the blue, I just decided to take my camera to a show here in the Bay Area. It was so terrifying, and I was so scared, like scared of like taking pictures of bands. It felt really intrusive and weird, and getting my gear broke or something like that. There were all these feelings that I was going through. I was afraid to use a flash at the beginning. So that kind of feeling slowly dissipated. And it was about a year of that. And I wasn't every show. I would go to a show, and then I would go to a couple without the camera, and then I would bring it again. And, but I was editing my photos. Of course, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was kind of winging it. I don't have any formal art training or photo training or anything. And then, uh, but what I was capturing, I was like, man, that actually looks kind of cool. Mm. So it kept me wanting to come back and maybe try again.
Yeah.
And then after about a year, I talked to a couple people. I was really freaked out about using the flash, and I felt like it would be very intrusive to the environment. And I talked to a couple of my friends who are in bands and stuff, and I was like, "How do you feel about like flash?" And they were like, "I don't even see it, or I don't care." Or so it kind of put me at ease from using flash at shows. And then after about a year, I tried using a flash at a show, and it was insane how much better my photos were.
Yep.
As a photographer, you will understand this, and I'm sure any other photographers from this know that, especially with show photography, the venues are inevitably dark. So it's so instrumental in getting a decent shot, especially anything action oriented, to use a flash. And then when I took that first flash photo of the show and I came home and edited it, or the first few, if you will, I was like, oh my, like these photos are so much better. And it was in a weird way, it kind of inspired me to start taking my camera to more shows and start using flash. And then it's just been this crazy trajectory. Probably, I guess that was probably around 2017. I still don't really have any formal. I took one or two like very basic rudimentary photo classes. Like, this is what an f-stop is. This is what ISO does. But it's
Mhm.
so funny. I look at my camera sometimes. I'm like, I don't even know what all these buttons what all these buttons do. But I mean, of course, I've learned a lot over the last, especially in the last probably like 5 or 6 years. I just feel like I've learned a lot about my camera and what works and what doesn't. And I've tried to push outside of doing show photography, trying to photograph skateboarders or other, night sky or like other things that are kind of out of my comfort zone. So I'm learning more. But yeah, most of the time I'm just winging it. I found a few things that work really good at shows and then I just go for it.
So that's also important, I think, that in this day and age, similar to you, I also did photography class in high school where there was a dark room, and then took one class in college and learned the basics, but didn't really know what I was doing at that time other than, the most basic. But I've learned also just through like trial and error and watching YouTube videos and stuff. There's just so much you can learn now without formal classes. And not to diss on that, I know that you can learn a lot from taking classes. A friend of mine who's a photographer taught university photography classes. I imagine it's amazing, but like you really can learn through trial and error, even more than ever now with digital cameras, where you can sort of see in real time what the settings do and then adjust as you go, rather than like with film where you'd have to take a whole roll, get it developed, and then "Oh, those were too dark. Next time, a week from now at the next show, I'll try a little different setting, and it could take months to sort of get it right, but yeah, I think that's important that you don't have to have a postgraduate education in photography. You can sort of learn as you go.
Yeah. And cameras, I mean, I am shooting manual, but you know, a lot of my stuff is like I use autofocus because uh it would be 100% impossible for me to get the majority of photos that I do if I wasn't relying on the camera um, to track the subject who is
Yeah.
jumping off the top of a speaker or doing some insane thing that I would never ever catch if I was trying to watch it through the viewfinder and using a manual focus. And then on flash, not to get too technical, but I have a lot of people go, "Oh, what are your flash settings and all that?" I'm like, TTL.
You just do TTL, yeah.
I flip it to TTL because I 100% have to rely on my camera to do the heavy lifting for me. Because, as you're well aware, and anyone that goes to punk shows, like they're screaming, energetic, wild, and crazy. And if I'm focused on the band and then something insane happens behind me in the crowd, I want to be able to spin around and have like less than a second, like a nanosecond, if you will, to capture something that's happening behind me. And
Yeah.
so, yes, I'm shooting on manual settings that I'm familiar with and comfortable with, but the camera has to do that, like I said, the heavy lifting to get the shot, if you will.
Yeah, and
So,
autofocus is so good on cameras now. It's that it's funny, like I also my first photography was at punk shows, so in it's like literally the hardest kind of photography you could do, where you have a dark room and fast moving subjects,
yeah,
and then like you said, you're focused on the stage, but then in the crowd you're having to change the focus and the light could be different. So if you can master that, then geez, you can do pretty much anything. But I wanted to ask, like, if you've been going to shows since the 1980s, I'm not a mathematician, but you're not in your 20s anymore,
you
and
know,
if you're clearly up right in front of the stage in the middle of the action. From looking at your pictures, you can tell you couldn't get those shots from the back with a 200 millimeter lens. You're right up in front, where I imagine sometimes you take some elbows or some combat boots to your body, or get jostled around. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the suffering you've had to go through to get the shots you do? Bruises, injuries. Have you had broken
sure.
cameras or lenses?
Well, I can't start this. I can't continue this conversation until I give you my very first show in life was DRI. And when I lived back in the Midwest, I saw them at a club in Ohio called Bogart's with Dr. No. The reason I'm bringing it up is the very first show I went to, I had my front tooth shattered off. Uh, s- uh, Somebody stage dove on top of my head, and my teeth hit together so hard. Fortunately, my tongue was not between my teeth. Otherwise, I probably would have lost my tongue, at least part of it. But my teeth slammed together so hard it shattered off part of my front tooth. They didn't actually hit my mouth; they hit the top of my head, but my teeth crack together like that. And of course, I was up front. That was like my introduction was this insane DRI show where like people were trying to tear the front of the stage off, and like it was like 1,000 stage dives, and I was hooked. I was hooked for life. I had footprints like all over. I remember like I had footprints all over my shirt, a broken tooth, and everything. So my very first show, I learned how cool it was to be up front and how badly I could get injured at a show.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of set that as a precedent. Since then, I've been injured many times at shows, but during, we'll call it the photography years, I have definitely been injured. But it's funny because I'm willing to take a hit for the sake of saving my camera. But as much as I try, my cameras and flashes have been injured many times. I've had in the let's see, I guess we're looking at about 10 years of taking photos at punk shows. I've had 4 flashes ripped off my camera, like completely shredded, torn off my camera. And then
And
I've had a lens crack, not the actual glass, but the plastic on the lens shattered off. And then I've had, over the last 2 years, I've had really bad luck with liquid damage. So I have 2 Nikon bodies that I use of the same camera, and both of them have had liquid damage. That could be anything from beer to water to I'm not sure what's being thrown on me right now.
unidentified liquid substance.
Possibly puke. I don't know. But yeah, I like, for example, I'll never forget this. I was photographing Amyl and the Sniffers in, where was I? I was in Los Angeles, and I was inside the barrier, which we'll call those the safe zone, right? You think, oh, what's the worst can happen? I'm inside the barrier. And I was facing the band, and they had just started their set. Like it was perfectly thrown. It was like the perfect quarterback throw. And I'm sure it wasn't intentional at all, but somehow beer came like flying over my head and landed perfectly upside down on top of my camera. So and we're talking a microsecond of it happening, but it hit my camera, and literally all the beer splashed down onto my camera, and my camera worked. I got the shots. I was able to finish the set, but it started kind of slowly getting slower and slower and malfunctioning throughout the set. So that's an example of like something you cannot control that at all. So I've had my numerous items sent into the Nikon repair shop here in California. So,
They're like, oh
but
God, here's this guy Rob again. What happened to his camera this time?
I will tell you, some of these bigger electronic companies in the US, like the Best Buys and stuff, they offer these extended warranties. And while typically I would never promote these large corporations, and they actually work. So I had a flash ripped off recently, but I had this extended warranty, like, where you pay, I don't know, 60 extra dollars. And then if you break it, if you will, you can take it in, they'll give you a new one. It worked flawlessly. I took in this broken flash, and they always ask you what happened, and you just make up some dumb story. You're like, oh, I dropped my camera. You don't go, this like huge like stage dive on top of me. I don't give those stories. I don't give the reality stories.
This guy
And
with
then I just,
steel-toed boots kicked it off.
yeah, exactly. So I always tell young or old, it doesn't matter if someone's asking me about gear or they're afraid they're going to break their gear. I'm always like, go to the store that has some sort of random extended warranty thing. Get this warranty for as long as you can get it. Usually, some places options are 2 to 4 years, and I'm like, they work. They actually they work. Just don't tell them what really happened. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what happened to your camera because it's broken, right? I mean, what can they say? People do crazy stuff with their gear outside of punk shows as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've definitely had some damage, and it's cost me thousands of dollars to get my gear fixed. As far as my body, nothing too bad in the camera years. I've been pretty lucky. Probably the worst injury I had nothing to do with my camera. It was self-induced. I was touring with a band called Enzyme from Australia and another band called Electric Chair. I did like a couple dates on the West Coast as a photographer. And at one of their shows, I decided I don't do very many stage dives. I've never been much of a stage diver, but I did a front flip during Enzyme, and I missed the crowd and landed flat on my back. And I thought I broke my back. I ended up going to get eventually. I finished the tour. I've never felt so old in my life. I literally could barely move for weeks. And then we were in a van with 10 people. So it was like the most uncomfortable thing for me being injured. But I eventually went and got an x-rayed and stuff. No, you didn't break it. You just have a severe back trauma. But yeah, that was self-induced. It had nothing to do with taking a picture. And I'm determined that will be my last stage diving.
Sounds like a
That
good
was some
call,
intense
probably.
pain and trauma. And now it's funny because I watch people's shows and I get so nervous when people are stage diving because of all the trauma and pain I went through. I'm like, somebody catch that person. Please catch that person.
Not nervous that you'll get a boot to the face, but that they'll injure themselves.
Exactly, exactly. I will say I'm the stage diver's worst nightmare as a catcher with my camera in my hand because I'm now a deflector, not a catcher because
Yeah.
I'm trying so hard. It's not that I don't want to support someone or catch them or make them feel safe, but oftentimes if someone's flying straight at me and I'm in a position where I either catch them or I kind of hold my arm up and deflect and save my camera. Usually they're going to get this motion.
Yeah.
So I'm usually not, I usually am scattering if someone's jumping towards me or like, kind of bobbing and weaving. Not because I don't want to catch them or because I don't want them and I want them injured, but because I don't want my gear broken. It's very expensive.
It is.
Yeah.
So, for people interested in trying out concert photography, and you mentioned this before, that at first you were nervous about, like, oh, I don't want to get in the way of people watching the show, or I don't want to use a
Yeah.
flash. It'll be disruptive, distracting. A lot of people interested in concert photography, like I'm in this Facebook group for beginner concert photographers, and the most common question is like, how do I get permission to take pictures at a show? Of course, people in that situation are thinking about probably bigger shows at more corporate events where you can't get in with a real camera
Yeah.
unless you have permission. But so I guess I'm curious about your hearing a little more from you about that. Do you mainly just take pictures at venues that are more DIY where you don't need permission? You can just go in with your camera and it's fine. And yeah, do you talk to the venue or bands before shooting them? And then with Flash, I'd like to hear a little more about that. Do you talk to bands before using Flash or just do it?
What the DIY level, so well, let's take a step back before I go to that. In general, overall, I just photograph shows where I don't have to worry about photo passes or flash rules or first three songs or any of that. Sometimes it's a conscious choice, meaning like there might be a show I want to photograph, but it's in a club that doesn't allow like full size DSLRs without photo pass and stuff. And then I just don't take my camera. Or I might actually see if I can find, like, if it's a band I really want to see and they're touring and I want to photograph, I may check their tour schedule. Maybe they're playing in the Bay Area at a club with camera rules, but maybe they're playing, 150 miles away in Sacramento or like whatever, and that in a smaller club that doesn't have camera rules. And I'll be like, I'll just go to that show and photograph them. Um, so camera rules at shows honestly can be a deterrent for me. Not in a negative way. I'll still go see shows without a camera. I don't have to have a camera to go to a show, but I do try to finagle around it. But I would say a solid 90% of the shows I go to have no camera rules. And it's not that I'm attending these shows because they don't have camera rules. I'm attending these shows because that's what I'm into. I've always been much more into this DIY underground element of punk shows. And frankly, a lot of those bands couldn't even play at the clubs with the camera rules. They won't have them. They're not worthy, if you will, in the club's opinion or whatever, or they're not money makers or whatever reasoning these clubs have for not booking those shows. So I'm naturally attracted to shows that are off the grid, if you will. And those shows inevitably have no camera rules. But as far as camera rules go, there are a couple clubs that I have good relationships with here in the Bay Area, and they kind of work with me, and it's really cool. They'll kind of work with me and they'll get the photo pass needed from the tour manager, what have you. And sometimes one club in particular will even kind of nudge the band, maybe the day of the show. I've had used to work. I still work with her occasionally. There's a stage manager that I really liked, and she would actually be like, "Hey, we have this in-house photographer, and they really prefer to use flash. Would you be into or okay with them using flash?" And she's even gone so far to show them some of my photos and being like, "Well, this is some of his work with flash." And occasionally, bands will be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that'd be cool. As long as we can get those photos." So, I've been able to kind of work with the clubs in acquiring passes, and then they'll do the footwork for me as far as reaching out to the tour managers and stuff. And in a lot of cases, it's not like I know a lot of bands, but if I know the bands that are playing these bigger shows, I'll just ask them directly. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, bring your camera, bring your flash. We don't care what you do." A lot of times they'll just say, "Oh, don't get on the stage," which is always a kind of a big no-no, especially at the bigger shows. They don't want some rando like running across the stage. But a lot of times I just work with the band directly. Even if I don't know them, I might be like, I'll give you an example. The Melvins is a great example. Like I photographed the Melvins, one of the guys in like before, and I was able to use a flash, but I didn't know them. It was just the club they were playing in. And I got all these really great photos of them. And then the next time they came through, I actually because one of the guys in the Melvins really liked the photos I was taking. Um, so I reached back out and I was like, "Hey," I mean, I said it in an elegant way, but for the basic root of it was, I said, "Hey, I'm that guy that took all those photos you like at the last show. Would it be okay if I used a flash at your upcoming show? I'd love to get more photos of you." And he was like, "Yeah, sure, I don't care." So sometimes even if I don't know the bands, I might try to work an angle of some, "Hey, I've photographed you before. I
Uh-huh.
know we don't know each other, but it seemed like you really enjoyed the photos that I was able to produce. Would it be okay if I showed up at your show again? Maybe photographed your whole set and maybe used a flash?" And sometimes they'll say no, and sometimes they say yes. But it's a weird world to navigate. But I frankly don't really shoot very many shows with PhotoPass requirements or flash requirements. So,
Yeah. Similar
and
to
it,
you, like I just don't have as much interest in going to those shows. So, I've done it occasionally, but yeah.
yeah, it's also a little frustrating too because not only, do you have to get the pass, but sometimes there's all kinds of there's additional weird rules that maybe you weren't aware of. Or I've been burned a couple times. Like, I never can really figure out who's at fault, but like I show up and they go, "Oh, well, we don't have any record of you getting a media pass." And then you're standing outside the club, like, and you have like one tour manager's name and no phone number, and you're trying to message them through Instagram or something. And it's a night of the show. And then you end up not being able to photograph them. So I've had a couple situations where, and I'm not like pointing fingers or anything. Weird things happen. Maybe an email was lost. Maybe the tour manager changed. Maybe we don't ever know. So I've been kind of burned a couple times, and it makes me want to shoot shows with photo pass requirements even less. So, and the other odd thing is, which is, I get it, I totally get it, but like I don't really work for media outlets. I don't. So these venues or bands or tour managers are always like, "Well, who are you shooting for?"
Right.
I'm like, "For me," and that's not. I mean, most of the time, I should say that's not enough. They
Right.
want to when they want you to hear, "I'm shooting for this blog or stuff." And sometimes I thought, "Oh, maybe if I just had a blog, I could just go, oh, I have this," but it's more work that I don't have time to do. Like I'm either photographing shows or editing at this point, and it's a complete time suck. So, but yeah, that's the other frustrating aspect is they want some legitimacy, which is understandable. To why should I give you a photo pass to come photograph us?
Yeah, it is interesting. Like it seems in some ways like a relic of the era when before the internet, right? When all there were like Rolling Stone or Spin or, Maximum Rock and Roll on the more DIY side. Like, that's why you would take pictures of a show because you worked for a publication. But now like those publications barely exist anymore, yet they still
Exactly.
have these rules. Anyway, so I want to get in. I'm going to change the topic a little bit here to talk a little bit more about your photographic style. And you alluded to it earlier, but to me, when you're scrolling through Instagram, you see so many pictures of bands and different photographers, and you can just sort of scroll through them because they start to sort of look similar. You have to me, a distinctive and recognizable photographic style. You are often shooting or editing in black and white, although not always. You usually have a pretty tightly focused image, focused in often on one band member, but not always just one band member. In fact, before I read some interviews with you before this interview, I just assumed you were shooting with like a 50 mm lens or something to get those tight shots. But I'd love to hear you maybe talk about what lenses you shoot with and how you get those
Hmm.
shots. But so black and white, tightly focused in, and you have an incredible sense of timing with your shots, with getting just amazing, really hardcore facial expressions, wildly contorted bodies, a lot of perfectly timed jump and kick shots, people in midair, like really high in the air, at the same time, you don't generally use some of today's common sort of hardcore punk shooting styles, like a lot of people shoot with a fisheye lens. I do that sometimes when I'm at shows. I haven't seen you do the shutter drag method where you have the light trails, and that's
Hmm.
a lot more common these days as well. How did you develop your photographic style, and what are you shooting with to get that style, and how did you come to shoot the way you do?
Well, I think we kind of need to almost loop back a little bit. So, as I mentioned earlier, the foundational zine or document, A Flights of Bold Cherries, What Am I Doing in the Pit, the photo zine that Maximum Rock and Roll put out with Murray Bowles, was such an insanely incredible, well, really a life changing thing for me to see all this like intense action of photos. Murray's photo style was really tight, really high energy, like trying to capture the action and stuff. So it was kind of this wild thing. So when I first, and with that said, many of the other photographers that I followed in the years after were also very similar. I was always attracted to the high energy, more close up shots of punks doing their thing. So when I started photographing shows myself, it was a very subconscious thing. It wasn't even, I didn't even really think about it. I was immediately wanting to flip everything to black and white because that was the aesthetic that I grew up with. There were no
Hmm.
color punk photos. Like there really weren't,
Right.
because there were no color zines or anything. I mean, eventually he started like, especially some of the covers and stuff of Flipside and what have you. But in general, it was all black and white. And then the very first photo I think I posted on social media was this really tight crop of a drummer, like the sweat flying and everything. And it was a really tight crop on him and it was in black and white. And then I just started editing my photos that way. And then the irony of it is it took about a year of doing this. And then I had this weird revelation. 'Cause I didn't even really think about, oh, what's influencing me right now? Or I was just in overdrive, kind of doing my thing. And I started looking at my work and I was like, I'm emulating everything that I mean, many other photographers, but it was really those kind of early foundational zines. And Maximum did another European photo zine around, I'm totally spacing on the name of it right now, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with it.
I don't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, they were kind of part of another one, and I'm totally spacing on the name of it, which was also a lot of really amazing photos. And just looking through books and my friend's stuff. But anyways, what it boils down to is those early Murray photos that I saw, and subconsciously I started editing my photos exactly how Murray was portraying his photos.
Mm.
And it was a really kind of big revelation for me. I was like, wow, I'm like just emulating this something that is so inherently ingrained in me, but I wasn't even realizing. I think it was so inherently ingrained in me. I didn't even realize that it was immediately formulating how I edited my photos or how I shot.
So
So,
with the sense of timing, like, is it just that you've been going to shows so long, you have a sixth sense of singer's about to jump, I'm going to be in this spot?
um, so you nailed it. And I think a lot of people, for whatever reason, I don't want to say struggle with it, but I I'm so familiar with the structure of punk music and how shows work, how bands work, that I can almost anticipate, right? Not almost, I can anticipate, not always, but I can anticipate literally the microsecond before something happens because I can feel or hear time changes happening in the music. So the thing that I do, and I always try to, if someone asks me, I always try to pass this along is, and it's really hard for people to break away. People looking through their viewfinder is a very comforting thing. And if you're shooting manual, you have to. But if you're trying to use autofocus, really try to move away from getting the camera away, get the camera away from your face. Because the minute you go like this, you've lost everything happening around you. You're only seeing what is in this tiny little square. So when I'm watching bands, the way I watch a band is has two levels of importance. Number one, I don't like holding the camera in my face because I'm not there to look through my camera. I'm there to watch the band. That will always be my priority. Like, sure, I love getting photos, but the essence and reason I'm standing in front of that band is because they're performing and I love their music and I'm excited about it and I want to absorb every second of it. And I've been that way since that first DRI show that I went to. It was hooked for life, as I said earlier. So that is a very essential part of me going to shows. And that allows me, because I'm not looking through my camera, to now I'm watching the band and I'm holding my camera and my hand is literally like it's almost like I have a motion detector on my hand. My eyes are reading my hand, and my hand is like following the band, kind of almost down by my side. So I'm watching the band. I'm really into them. I'm fist pumping, but the whole time, the second part of my brain is like moving my hand back and forth, and I'm following the band member who's maybe super energetic or about to do something. And the second they do something or I anticipate it happening, I fire my camera. So it's kind of this neat thing where I'm getting a shot. I'm also fully in tune with the music and I'm not losing the moment that I'm really there to be part of anyway. So I've found this balance of how I take pictures at shows. And 90% of the time I'm at shows, I'm not looking through my viewfinder. So I have shot photos happening behind me, off to my side, above my head, to a weird angle. Um, I've kind of shot pretty much every angle you could possibly imagine and holding your camera without actually looking through anything. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But that is the absolute key. And not only being in tune with the music and understanding song structure and time changes and anticipating, but keeping your camera kind of following the action, but not losing focus of the show. And honestly, I feel like, and I always talk to other photographers about this, the more you're into the band, the more you're focused in the actual moment that's happening in front of you, the better your photos will be.
Hmm.
I am a true believer in that. And I watch people at shows, and I would never critique anyone unless they actually asked me for advice or an opinion. But I watch people at shows, they'll take a picture and then they'll look at the back of their camera while everything's happening in front of them, or there'll be, there's some weird distraction with their camera and they're constantly fiddling with it. And I'm like, you're missing you're missing everything happening in front of you. I realize you have to sometimes change the setting or do whatever. That's
Sure.
understandable. But if you're losing the moment happening in front of you, you're not going to get the photos that you want.
Hmm.
That's kind of my kind of philosophy.
So let's get into some of the nitty gritty of settings. So you've said, listen up, kids. Don't hold the camera up to your eye when you're at a show, trying to get good photos, at least a punk show where there's fast moving action.
Sure, sure.
You're holding the camera not right in front of your eye. But what settings are used? So you talked earlier about that you're using autofocus continuous or whatever it's called on Nikon. I
Yeah,
use
yeah.
Sony. Do you use back button focus so that you sort of have your thumb on a button that is focusing, or you just use normal focus? And then what are your basic starting point settings for shooting in a dark venue?
Sure. Before we go any further with the camera settings, I do want to point out one really, really important thing about holding a camera near your face. I used to not even though I'm not looking through the viewfinder, I used to hold my camera like kind of like at shoulder height here, and I've been hit in the face so many times with these hard body metal Nikons because somebody will come at me and it smashed me in the face, or I got hit like this. And so that's another reason not to hold the camera near your face is it
Safety,
could
yeah.
actually cause you physical harm. I've been hit in the face a lot of times by my camera. So I don't really hold it anywhere around my face when I'm shooting, especially if it's a really chaotic show. And with that said, camera settings. So you had mentioned fisheye. So I don't use a fisheye, but 90%, 95% of the photos I shoot are on a 14 by 24. So I'm using a very big
Wide.
wide angle and almost everything shot at 14 millimeter. So it
It,
has its advantages and occasional disadvantages. The disadvantage is it does these weird body distortions sometimes, especially
around the edges,
like at
especially.
the edges of the photo. Sometimes that looks really cool, but sometimes I lose photos because it just looks too weird. Like someone's arm is like 4 feet long. So, and so I end up throwing away a lot of photos because there's weird body distortion. Uh, the only time I really use other lenses is maybe if something's far away, but 99% of the shows I shoot, I'm really close to the band anyway. So I can get away with a 14 by 24 for anything.
So
Also
if you're
for shows, oh, go ahead.
So if you're shooting like 14 millimeter, let's say you have it as wide as it goes, yeah, that makes sense then that you can just sort of hold the camera out and
Yeah,
you'll get pretty much likely get the person in front of you in the frame. And then do you just crop in later in
everything.
post production? Okay.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever posted a photo that wasn't cropped. Like
Okay.
I literally crop everything because we've discussed already. Like I really want to get into the nitty gritty of the emotion or action happening in the photo. But yeah, so I'm using a 14 millimeter, and then as we've discussed, flash. And I'm trying to remember what your question,
So
exact question.
so
Oh,
you're
some of
shooting
the
with a
settings
Nikon
and stuff.
body, a 14 millimeter lens,
Yeah,
flash on TTL setting, which is essentially auto setting for flash. What's your f-stop are you usually shooting at? Are you at f8 or something so that also makes sure everything's in focus, or are
yes.
you at like 2.8?
No, no, never. I would never shoot that low. I'm usually at f8 because I want a lot of depth. And that's the other thing too is here's the cool thing. So because I'm using a full frame camera and I'm shooting a 14-24, usually almost always set at 14. Not only so if my hand's down at my side and I'm tracking whatever's happening, and let's say the singer jumps or does something weird and I get a photo, but the guitars behind him did something way cooler that maybe I didn't even see. So when I
Yeah.
go to edit that photo, I go, "Oh, cool! I got a picture of the singer," and I'm like, "Wait, whoa! Look at this guitarist." So I shoot it, and then it's in focus. So I'm shooting at f8 because I like depth in the photo. I mean, there's a beauty in like a tight focus with a little bit of a blurry background, but I don't really care for that in my shooting style. I'd much rather have a tight focus on something and then this really crystal clear. I'm sure it's really obvious from my photos, but I love really beautiful clarity. I think there's a really a strong essence and beauty to like light streaking and things that are soft focus. But that's not the aesthetic I'm shooting for. I want everything as crisp and beautiful as possible. That's also why I like shooting at f8 because it just makes everything in focus, or I can just capture something really cool happening in the background. And then I have my shutter speed maxed out, so it's syncing with my camera at 250, um, which works for 99% of the shots. Because as long as it's in the dark, it gets a little weird when there's a lot of like if I'm out in sunlight and stuff, I kind of have to change everything around, even
Yeah.
if I'm using flash. And then ISO 1600 to 2000. So occasionally, I'll get some grain in my photos, but honestly, not very much. It's surprising how little grain I get in my photos, and if I do get a little grain, I'll just do a little post production cleanup on the grain.
And yeah, I mean, shooting at f8 in a dark environment, yeah, get a lot of light from a flash. So, I mean, that allows you
Yeah.
to do that. But yeah, that ISO, I was curious if you just sort of let the ISO go really high, but I guess you don't need to if if your flash is
No,
doing. But
no.
your photos don't look flashy, if you know what I mean. Like you can tell you're using flash because it's a clear, bright photo in a dark environment, but it doesn't look flashy. Are you bouncing the flash like off the ceiling or the walls, or do you have the flash straight on the subject?
Straight on the subject. And I think one of the things I do is I spend a lot of time in my editing my photos, but what I try to do is one, I tend to like them very bright, give them a very bright aesthetic and really draw like a lot of attention to it. And number two, I try to balance the lighting of the flash. So what I mean by that is there's two things happening. Number one, a lot of times I shoot with my camera sideways, like more in a vertical position. So the flash is either to my left or to my right.
Uh-huh.
So one side of the photo is a lot brighter than the other side.
Split
So
lighting, I guess that's called. Yeah.
yeah, so I spend a lot of time. What did you call it? Sorry.
Split lighting, where
Split lighting. Yeah.
the most extreme is where like a portrait of someone straight on and one side of their face is black and the other is lit. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's not that
right.
heavy, but it is definitely noticeable a lot of times. One side of the photo will be a lot brighter than the other. So I tend to spend a lot of time balancing that out in brightness. And then a lot of times, what I'll do, which maybe kind of takes away even more of the flash aesthetic, if you will, is I brighten the background up and kind of equalize the photo, the brightness of the photo. So I tend to still leave the subject a little brighter just because I want them to stand out.
Yeah,
But I don't do it always, but a lot of times I try to balance the brightness in the photo. So everything looks more equalized. It's almost like a weird, like
interesting.
daytime scene. Is the sun shining? But no, it's actually in a dark room that I could barely see the drummer.
Yeah.
But I was able to kind of balance everything out and brighten it. But I do most of the photos I edit are obviously everything's cropped, but most of the photos I edit, I really bring up the brightness because I just want everything to pop. I want the viewer. I just want to go look at what's happening in this photo. Like I don't want you to miss it. So
So I've heard you say in other interviews that you don't do a lot of editing on your photos. You talked about one thing that you do is up the brightness or the shadows maybe. What else do you often do in terms of editing after you take the photo?
well, the very first thing I do, though I am slowly starting to move more to color, oftentimes the first thing I do is flip it to black and white because I want to see how it looks.
Uh-huh.
And then secondly, I do a tight crop. And then I kind of, run through. I have a couple settings set up, kind of brighten it and like just kind of balance the black and white out. But all that actually happens really quickly. That's the fast part. The only time I end up having to spend a lot of time on my photos is, like I said, if there's an extreme, like as you said, the split color. Like if it's really out of balance, brightness wise, then I'm like just balance that brightness out, and that's the big time suck for me because
Sure.
then you start doing it, and then you brighten one side up a little, and then you're like, oh, I need to change this, and then it
Yeah.
becomes this whole 20 minutes later, you're still stuck on the same photo. But most of the photos I edit through, it's pretty simple. It's black and white, crop, bring the brightness up, clean it up. Maybe sometimes I'll zoom in to make sure there's not too much noise happening in the background of the photo, any grain or grit. And then it's done. I try to keep a simple thing, but I can get lost on the brightness aspect. And that's just more of a personal preference thing. It's funny because I'm finding you would think it would almost be, you spend less time. Say the more experienced you become at editing and the more comfortable you become. But what I'm finding is I'm becoming more particular. So maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was spending less time editing my photos. And now I'm taking similar shots with similar action, but I'm actually spending more time on my photos because I'm becoming more and more picky about how
Okay.
detailed and balanced they look. So it's funny, maybe when I was at the time in the interview that you read, I was like, maybe wasn't actually spending as much time in the photos as I do now. But still, in general, it's a pretty quick process for me.
Okay. So one other thing that I wanted to ask about is that a lot of times people just starting out are trying to figure out they'll post their photos on social media and get frustrated that they're not getting many likes or followers. And especially
Mhm.
now that Instagram has basically become a video platform, started out as a photo platform and now feels to me like they basically throttle content if you just post photos and don't add audio or turn it into a reel. You've had success on social media, at least on Instagram. You have over
Mhm.
50,000 followers. Your posts routinely get thousands of likes. How have you been able to grow that much of an audience for your photos, especially in this era where video is really being favored by the algorithm?
Honestly, that's kind of a tough question. I don't actually I don't have a guideline, I guess, if you will.
There's one neat trick to become
Yeah,
an
yeah.
Instagram
I wish I
influencer.
had the secrets of their algorithm and everything. For anyone using social media, it's even myself, it's very easy to get flustered or frustrated. Maybe something's not as performing as well as you would like. The one thing I would suggest is try to do collaborations with artists, whether they're upcoming or established. I find that's very helpful. Collaborations with the bands, and do I cold call on collaborations a lot, and sometimes they're not accepted, and that's okay. What I mean by that is maybe I photographed a band I don't really know, but I got these photos I really like, so I post the photos and I'll add the band as a collaborator, and then usually I'll send a little message and go, "Hey, I saw you, last week in San Francisco, and your show was phenomenal. I thought you might be interested in seeing these photos. I added you as a collaborator. Feel free to accept. And if you don't, that's too cool. That's cool as well. And I'll catch you next time you come through town." And just kind of put a little personalization to add your collab thing and make it, don't put any pressure on the band. Like, you got to accept my collaboration, especially if you don't know them. And most of the time bands will accept because of course they want the dual exposure. They're like, oh, these photos are kind of cool. Yeah, I'd love to do a collab. So that's the one thing I could recommend for anyone, upcoming or established photographers, is trying to work a collaboration angle, and tagging, trying to really figure out who's in your photo, tagging people, drawing attention to it. Even though tagging isn't necessarily putting it on someone else's account, they may see it, repost in their stories. There's all kinds of weird little things that I do. Another recommendation is not only doing a collaboration, adding a collaborator with, say, the band in particular, but maybe doing a little extra research and figuring out what their latest record, what label their latest record came out on, and adding that label as a collaborator, and also sending a little bit of a personalized message and going, "Hey, just wanted to add you as a collaborator. I checked out, XYZ's band, newest release on your label. It's so good. I thought maybe you'd be interested in seeing these photos. If you want to accept, that'd be great. If not, that's cool too. Have a great day."
Right on.
I find a little bit of personalization and not just kind of like blindly just adding people and not really thinking about it is kind of a good method, and just tagging as many people as you can in the photos that are relevant to your
Sure.
photos. And, those are really the only kind of recommendations I have. Just staying true to your work and believing in your art, that comes through having confidence. And I know it's so easy to get flustered in our day and age of social media and acceptance amongst our peers, but try not to get too hung up on that and just kind of keep focusing and pushing forward and believing in the product and the I hate using that word, but not, maybe not product, the whatever your skill set is and what you're putting out there in the public eye. That's kind of the best recommendation I have. It's weird sometimes, and I don't, like, once again, I don't have any control over it. Is the real breakthrough I find for Instagram, there's zero recommendations of how to control this, is getting into their algorithm and Where my photos really often take off is if it gets into the Instagram algorithm, not just like my people following me, but if it gets into their thing where, like you go and you can look at just random posts or random photos, random reels or whatever. And then somehow my photo will occasionally, like a photo will get into that. And
Yeah.
then it's crazy because suddenly it goes from like medium like activity and it just skyrockets and like, thousands of people are seeing it. And then because it's being seen and liked, it Instagram kind of leaves it in this forum where like all these people that don't know me or don't follow my photography are seeing it. And then that's crazy. And that garners a lot of interest and followers. But I can't I have no recommendation whatsoever of
For
how
how
to
to do
make
that.
that actually happen, but I find that has been an essential part of it. Actually just happened with a group of photos I posted recently. It doesn't happen very often. I wish I had a bat phone and I could call up, my contact at Instagram and be like, "Can you put this photo into your algorithm?" It would be really helpful for me.
You're in the
But
Bay
yeah,
Area, all
the
these
other
tech people there, like, maybe, yeah, you just show up at, Facebook headquarters and
yeah,
pay someone
I wish.
off.
I that's really all I can say. I don't have a secret formula, but just stay true to your art and try to draw in as many people as you can through collaborations and tag to bring interest to your photography or whatever art you're pursuing.
Yeah, I appreciate those suggestions. What, we've gone over an hour, so I'm gonna just ask one more question, and then we can start
Sure.
to wrap up, but are there other you mentioned Murray Bowles as your biggest inspiration in terms of
Mhm.
photographer. Are there any other punk or live music photographers, maybe today or in the past, that you'd wanna call out as inspiring to you?
I will say, uh, there are a couple of photographers. I think the best way to frame this is who was essential in helping me get my feet on the ground when I started taking photos. Um, there's a couple people that I can't not mention here. One is a very good friend of mine, Caroline Collins, who I've known for decades, but she's been a punk photographer since the 90s, maybe even taking photos in the 80s, but definitely throughout the 90s. She toured all over the world with various bands. Her nickname was the Roadie Girl, so on and so forth. But we've been friends. But my point is her photography is so inspirational to me, and her DIY aesthetic and truly believing and loving the underground community and being a part of it for so many years. She was very instrumental in like advice and questions, and we still hang out and we still swap camera stories. We still go to shows together. So that's a very inspirational subject to me. Another really important person to me, photography. I'm kind of moving away from the I want to say, oh, the Glenn Friedmans and the Ed Culvers and the all the classics which were so important. But I want to talk about people who personally touched me. Um, and then there's another photographer named Mark Merman, and he was also so helpful and helping me kind of just like bouncing a couple questions off of him. He's like been part of the punk scene. He was a coordinator at Maximum Rock and Roll. He's a photo editor for Mother Jones magazine, which you're probably familiar with. But he also is a foundational person in the photozine Hamburger Eyes. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. But anyways, um, he was very kind when I was first getting into photography and just answering questions and helping me really kind of understand foundational stuff and his early photos, especially through the 90s. And he's still occasionally photographing shows, but a lot of his early material was so cool and foundational for me. And then the final person I kind of want to mention here is another photographer who lives in Sacramento, which is about 100 miles from San Francisco, but he was also so helpful and inspirational. His name's Matthew Cotty. And he's still so cool. Love that guy to death. Phenomenal photographer, very down to the DIY community. He's in punk bands himself. Whole Hog is one of his bands. Another band's called Monster Squad. So he kind of understands both sides of being in a band and also photographing the bands, which I think in some ways is even more helpful in kind of being a punk photographer. But he's helped me over the years. Like I go, I don't know, how much do you charge for this? I don't know what I'm doing, like somebody asked me to do this and they asked me how much I charge. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And he'll kind of guide me through that or camera settings and just general presence of being in shows and watching how he shoots and kind of learning, bouncing ideas off of him. Those three people are so important, and they're all out of the punk rock community and punk photographers. So I feel like I don't think I've ever really brought them up in an interview before. So I think this is a great opportunity to give those three people like name recognition and shout outs. They're all on Instagram. I think those three people are essential to, and it's crazy because I think I know a lot of punk photography. Let me rephrase that. Punk photographer. And I'm always finding out about these crazy photographers. So many people were photographing the scene in the 70s and 80s, and they just are sitting on boxes and boxes of negatives.
Yep.
And then they're just like, well, I think this punk rock thing's kind of cool again, or whatever, like is going on in their mind. And then suddenly they start an Instagram account and they started posting photos of Jello Biafra from like 1981 at some random club that you've never seen in your life. And it's one of the best punk photos you've ever seen. You're like, how many people are sitting on those like archives that we may never see in our lifetime? Uh,
Yeah. Well, that
Yeah,
was that was me too. I took photos in DC from 87 to 93 and sat on the negatives till 2014. I'd always had in my head, oh, I'll scan them in sometime. And I finally acknowledged that was never going to happen and just brought them to one of those places where they'll scan them for you. And so that was when I first put some of my like Fugazi and Bikini Kill and Nation of Ulysses, those kinds of photos online. And those ones still get shared all over, like on Instagram. But you're right. There are still new people every day that, pop up that we're sitting on these things and maybe their kids are grown now and they're clearing out the attic and yeah, they finally get to it. So it's exciting.
they're like, oh my god, what am I doing on these 17 boxes of negatives that I haven't looked at in 40 years?
Yep. Well, I'll definitely include those three people that you mentioned in the show notes so people can follow the links there.
Sure, and I can send you some links as well to their social medias in case you're it'd be helpful to add.
Yeah, thank you. So, and then the last question is just where can people find out more about your exhibition and about your photography in general?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, because unfortunately, I don't have more than really one place where I'm showing photos or anything, and that's on Instagram. I've never I literally don't have time. I don't do a blog. I don't do a website. If people are ever interested in purchasing photos, they just need to contact me through Instagram. So, but Instagram is my go-to. It's where I feature all my work, and it's basically my entire historical photo context is on that app. That's a weird thing to say when you really think about it, but it's worked well for me. It's helped me really network with people all over the world and really establish some really wonderful relationships out of it. So as much negativity as some of these social media apps get, I mean, if you really try to utilize it in a positive way, then it works out pretty well at times. But I announce everything there, like any shows that I have coming up. It's kind of crazy. I'm in a very blessed, grateful time right now. I'm in 4 art shows locally right now,
Wow.
which is crazy. I have a photo up in the museum, and that's a cool thing is museums are now doing punk photo exhibits, which is kind of crazy and cool. And I know there's a lot of people who are like, punk doesn't belong in a museum. And I'm like, well, yes and no. But I think it's cool that it's getting the recognition and it is what I have found is that when punk is exhibited in a museum, it's always been presented in a way that really upholds the aesthetic and values of said show, meaning, it really highlights the politics and and the culture and everything. And I never have felt any exhibit that I've ever seen in a museum has been degrading or incorrect. So I'm fully supportive of it. I'm like, if you want to reflect this incredible culture and show this to a larger public, then I'm 100% behind it. But yeah, I have 4 exhibits right now happening, and I have a 5th exhibit coming up in a couple weeks. So it's been a very, very crazy few months for me, and I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, really, that's kind of my only social media outlet where you could find out about any upcoming shows. I try to post a lot of flyers and stuff. So I know probably have listeners all over the world, but I do get a lot of people who contact me and they're like, "Hey, I'm coming to the Bay Area. What shows are coming up?" So I post a lot of flyers, but there's also a thing which I can also give you a link to, which is just an essential part of the Bay Area scene. I can send it to you later. It's called The List. I don't know if you've ever heard of The List. Maybe you saw it when you came out here. It's one guy who puts together a list of every show in the Bay Area, and he's been doing it for decades. And he used to hand out paper copies. And when he would show up at the show with his paper copies back before the internet, it was this insane swarm. He was like the red carpet celebrity. Like all the punks, his name's Steve. All the punks would go running towards Steve because they knew he had the latest show list, and it was like this kind of very rudimentary
Yeah.
typed out list. It was actually called The List, and you just be like pouring over it, like who's coming? Oh my God, Born Against or whatever. But now it's all online, so I can send you a link for that too. But that's an essential part of the Bay Area scene. But yeah, just social media, Instagram. That's all I really have
Right
going
on.
for a work presentation.
Cool. Well, I thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about your exhibit and all of the things that you've shared in terms of your technique, your editing style, your history of photography. Really greatly appreciative. And also for anyone who's still listening after all this time, appreciative that you've listened through the whole interview. And
Appreciate it.
if you've listened
Yeah,
this far, you should hit all the buttons to like and subscribe and do all the things, and consider donating to Get the Picture on Patreon so we can keep this going. All right.
great. Well, I really appreciate your interest in my photography and reaching out and setting this up. And as I mentioned before we even got on the air, I do like to talk this stuff. So I truly enjoy having an opportunity and platform to share my thoughts on photography, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, for me, it's never too long of a conversation talking about photography, and even more so punk rock photography. So,
Exactly.
all right. Thanks so much.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. Bye now.